Welcome to Let's Go Again, a podcast for the independent class where we contemplate the big questions like what is the artist's role in society? And we strategize for the smaller ones, like how do I grow an audience when my posts reach about 5 people per day? We'll tackle those ideas and everything in between. I'm your host, Courtney Romano, a writer-director in Providence and your comrade in arms as we navigate this indie artist group project. My hope is that each episode is another chance for us to reset and figure out this path together, outside of the system and on our own terms. So, as they say on a set, let's go again. Firstly, and most importantly, happy Severance release day to all who celebrate. It's a beautiful day. And secondly, look, there's a common piece of advice for getting attention for your work, which is niche down. People will say, know who you're speaking to and be specific. Define your audience. But what they fail to address in giving that advice is, what if you don't have an audience yet? What if the people who watch or pay for your work are your mom and a random friend from your first year's seminar in undergrad, and that's it? How are you supposed to define an audience who doesn't exist? I mean, it's a catch-22. You need to grow your audience by being clear about who you're speaking to, but you want to grow your audience because you're not speaking to anyone. So today, let's try to unravel the mystery of how to grow an audience when you don't have one. Okay, so first of all, let's dive a little bit deeper into why people say niche down in the first place. It's because it works. It actually does. Specificity breeds magnetism. The more specific you are, the more interesting you are. Think about it this way. If you've ever sent a meme to your best friend because it's something only you two could understand, then you get what exactly it means to niche down. It is so specific that it gives you this kind of self-identifying moment of like, oh my gosh, that is so me. Now, traditionally, when we are talking about niches and cornering a market and all of that, like boring business stuff, typically people think about demographics. This would be your age, your sex, your location, your education level. It could be something like, all right, we're targeting a demographic of moms or college grads or people who live 50 miles away from a major city. If you think about defining your audience, that could be where your mind goes right away, is those typical traditional demographics. Now, I'm going to give you an alternative for that. But before I get there, I want to answer this question, which I feel like I would be asking at this point if I didn't know where I was going, which is, why do indie artists need audience demographics? Why can't we just make our work? If you are here, then you probably know that I believe in this concept of the 21st century artist. And what that means is an artist who is embracing their given circumstances. Many times that means no connections, no money, very little bandwidth because you're doing everything. And they reject dogma from the industry or traditional ladders, corporate ladders, industry ladders. So for indie artists, we are doing a lot of work on our own, and yet we're still playing in the system. And the system requires us to communicate in a certain way. So if you are operating outside of the system, you might find yourself making things like pitch decks to send to production companies or sponsorship deals and agreements, or you might be creating PR pitches for press for your book tour or for your film or for your latest album, or you might be directly selling to an audience if you have merch or other kinds of products and services and events and media that you want to sell. In all of those examples, and there are of course plenty more, you need to know who your audience is, because that is going to determine everything from, do you spend money on paid ads or not? If you do spend money on paid ads, where are you targeting? Who are you targeting? So that if you don't have a lot of money, you're not just spending money willy-nilly without really thinking about who you're targeting. Having a demographic helps you get brand deals and sponsorship deals because you align with another company's or brand's target audience. So knowing your audience is essential for growth and ownership of this indie artist pathway that we're kind of creating as we're walking. So knowing your audience, your target audience is kind of like you have to. Like if you want to get anything done and if you want to really have any sort of leverage in and out, inside and outside of the system, then you need to know your audience. You need to know it for yourself. You need it to know it for partnerships. And definitely, if you're selling anything to a studio or a company or a brand or any of these other kind of people who are outside of your immediate art world, you need to know your audience. But here's the difference in how I want you to think about this. I don't want you to use demographics. I want you to use something else entirely to define your audience. And that something is psychographics. Psychographics are a picture of a customer's or an audience member's psychology. And understanding it helps you speak so much more clearly to your potential audience. So, for instance, let's look at two examples here. Demographics might say, okay, my product or my film or my brand, whatever it is, I'm targeting 40-year-old moms. That's a demographic. 40 years old, a mom, and that like kind of tells you some other demographics that you might be able to imply based on location and all of that. But if you are defining your audience through psychographics, you might say, okay, I am speaking to people who have a fundamentally countercultural attitude. They make their own bread every week, and their aspirational icon is Joan Didion. Okay, so that gives you a certain picture, right? But that person could be a 40-year-old mom. It could also be an 18-year-old non-binary community college student, or it could be a 70-year-old retired postal worker in Montana. The demographics, the age, sex, location, all of that, they give you shallow information, and the psychographics give you gold. And here is why psychographics work. Think about your favorite movie. For example, one of my favorite movies is Jaws. And a lot of people like Jaws, and a lot of people say it's one of the best movies of all times, and a lot of people relate to it. And yet, I bet that most people who've watched that movie have never saved a small New England town from shark attacks. We have not been Chief Brody. We have not been on a ship that is defending a small little boat that's defending itself from a shark in order to save the town, right? And yet, we're connected to it. And yet we see something of ourselves in that story. That's why it's appealing. That's why it's magnetic. That's why we'll watch it again and again and again, or at least we'll watch it once and then, letterbox it and tell all of our friends how smart we are for watching such a beautiful film. You might not have saved that New England town, but you might have felt feelings of desperation and confusion and a desire to save people and a desire to beat something and a desire to be free of fear, just like Chief Brody felt. So when we look to psychographics to define our audience, we are actually getting to the emotional heart of how people make decisions, because people make decisions based on their emotions. They don't make decisions based on logic. I remember listening to I think it was an episode of The Daily where they were breaking down how people decide to buy houses or not. And they were saying, everyone says, oh, don't make an emotional decision in buying a house, but there's not fully a complete upside to buying a house versus renting. There are compromises, there are pros and cons, there are hidden costs in buying a house that doesn't necessarily make it a good investment every time. Like there are lots of logical reasons why renting might be better than buying a house. But there are also a lot of emotional reasons why people buy a house. And this is easy to see, I think, when you think about something like big, like a house. But I mean, this relates to even buying a coffee. When we lived in New York, I used to like to walk around holding a coffee because I don't know, it was my emotional support coffee. I just liked walking around with it. Think about when you buy, a shirt that you really like. It's not like you don't have shirts, right? It's an emotional choice. It makes you feel a certain way. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel like, an aspirational aspect that you've been wanting to embody. It's not like you logically need the shirt, but if the shirt is also marked down to 40%, what you'll say is, well, I got that because it was marked down to 40%. But no, you didn't. You bought the shirt because it made you feel something. So people will buy things based on emotion. They will buy into things. I'm not even just talking about selling a product, right? Making money, but they will buy into things based on their emotions, and then they will justify them with logic. So you can't actually even really speak to logic without speaking to emotions first. It's kind of just a waste of time because it's not how people think. So when you are trying to speak to your audience, going with, well, I'm a 40-year-old mom, so other 40-year-old moms will like what I'm saying, does not make sense. Maybe they will, maybe some will, and some won't. But if I speak to the psychographic of countercultural punk rebels at heart, then we're actually getting somewhere. Okay, so let's get to the heart of this. How do I define an audience if I don't have an audience? So here's what I want you to know. A good audience is not made up of a lot of people. It's made up of one person. One person. In copywriting and marketing, there's this phrase called the power of one. And the idea is that you are never speaking to a broad swath of people. You couldn't, right? Like no group of people is a monolith, so you couldn't. But what you can do is speak specifically and directly to one person through their psychographics, and people will self-select. People will say, that's me, that's me. For an example, in 1959, Volkswagen, the car company, came up with this campaign called Think Small. And the idea was in 1959, everyone was buying these huge cars, luxury cars. So we are talking, like Rolls Royce and Cadillacs and all these big, beautiful, hunky cars. But Volkswagen made a small car, a small and efficient car. So they looked at the current culture and they said, okay, everyone wants this big car. This is like what is trending right now in 1959, on the verge of, the 1960s revolution and everything. It's like the golden era, and bigger is better, and American values means like taking up space, right? Volkswagen comes in with their Think Small campaign and they say, okay, we're going to work with what we have, which is a small, compact, efficient, and affordable car. And we are going to position this against the backdrop of what's popular right now. And what we're going to lean into is the fact that the kind of person who wants this car is automatically kind of countercultural. The kind of person who wants to get into this car is not going to be buying a big one, a luxurious one. They are going to be someone who might bristle at ostentatiousness or gratuitousness. They might be someone who is on the early end of the 1960s political movement. They might be someone who is middle class and can't afford a luxury car, but doesn't want to feel bad about it. They want to feel really good about choosing the smaller, more affordable option. So when we think about people who might fit those psychographics, those people could be coastal academics. They could be Midwestern moms. I mean, they don't reside in one city, one place. They don't identify as one particular gender or another. They don't necessarily even have the same level of education, right? What they have is the desire to maybe be different, the desire to feel good about going against the grain. And so Volkswagen came up with this Think Small campaign that leaned into that like they created this huge, full page ad, and they had a little picture of their car in like the upper left-hand corner and then a ton of white space. And it just said, think small. And this is great branding and advertising, right? And it's very 21st century artist because it's all about who the person is who's looking at that ad, and not, oh, let's make this work for Midwestern moms and Midwestern moms only. They made an entire campaign to communicate values. And when you share those values, you will self-identify as someone who wants a Volkswagen car. Okay, so maybe I've convinced you. And you're at the point where you're saying, okay, well, how do I choose that one person? Again, Courtney, I don't have an audience. I don't have anyone to pull from. So how do I don't even have one person. How do I choose that person? All right. So I'm going to give you 5 different ways that you can find the person you want to write for. But again, there are a million ways. Hopefully these 5 ways will just kind of be a spark for you to think through it. Okay. The first person you're going to think about is who has paid you? Who has paid you money to teach them something, consult with them? What kind of people or brands have you perhaps freelanced with? This could be an old client, but who is the person, maybe if it is for a company, who hired you for that project? And what do they want? And think about their psychographics and theirs alone. Like if it was a big collaboration, just choose one person out of that collaboration. If it was a client, that's easy. They paid you for consulting or something like that. And think about who they are and where they are in the world and what they want. The second person is someone, maybe you haven't, done anything to make money before. So someone who has DM'd you, someone where you've posted something or written something and they have messaged you back or emailed you. Someone who is consuming your work. They might not be double tapping on everything. You might not even realize if they're like engaged with you or not, but they reached out from you and kept a conversation going that you had started when you thought you were just speaking into the void. Think about that person's psychographics. Who are they? What do they value? What are they all about? The next person, the third person, is someone who has asked for your advice. This might be someone who sees you as like a little bit further down the road from them. So maybe someone who's a little bit younger or a little bit newer in the same space as you. You can also sometimes think about this as like, well, who was I 5 years ago? What questions was I asking 5 years ago? The fourth person is someone who reposts you, someone who relates and feels seen by you. I think like what's interesting about reposts, and I don't love like thinking too much about social media, but when someone reposts you, like that is actually like they're seeing whatever you're writing and saying, this is a positive reflection of me. This is going to be a way that I want to advertise myself, right? We put up memes because we're like, this is me, right? So when someone reposts your work, they are actually self-identifying in your work. And that's a really interesting person that you could kind of research and think about and come up with their psychographics. And then finally, the person who has invited you to coffee or invited you on a podcast, someone who feels like you're kind of in the same universe, even if you're not doing the exact same things. So you're going to come up with those 5 people, and maybe you'll have a bunch of people written down for each section, and you'll just choose someone who feels the most, I want to say like sticky, someone who you're like, actually, yes, I'm getting this intuitive nudge, that is the person. And then once you have identified one person from that, potential list that you've created, then you're going to ask yourself 3 questions. And this is a little writing trick of mine. So whenever I am writing a scene and I write through it the first time, and then I go back and I edit again, and I edit again. And each time I ask myself these 3 questions when I'm editing the scene. And the clearer I get in answering these questions, the better the scene is. And I think that this is where we can find a lot of overlap between the creative process for art and the creative process for building the scene and the idea and the community around our art. And these questions are the following. What does this person want? What is the obstacle for them to get what they want? And why now? What does this person want? Okay, so what is their intention? What is their aspiration? What are they trying to accomplish? What do they think they want? What are they really going after? What are they studying for? What are they paying for? What do they want to happen? What is the best case scenario of something that they want to happen? The next one is, what is the obstacle? So what's the problem? What is standing in their way? Why haven't they gotten the thing that they want? If what they want is to be an incredible writer, maybe the obstacle is they have no time because they're in school, or they're working 2 full-time jobs, or they're a caretaker of some sort. So they might want to be a writer, they might aspire to be a writer, but they don't have a lot of time. And the third question is the most important question, which is, why now? Why does it matter now? There are a lot of things that we want. There are a lot of things that we say that we want. There are a lot of things we think we want. But when we ask why now, what we're doing is understanding what the urgency of the moment is. And that usually speaks to an even deeper want, right? There's the first level want of like, I want to be a writer. And then when you ask why now, it's like, well, what's the deeper level of that? I am afraid I'm going to miss out on my potential, right? Okay, whoa, that is a completely different thing than just wanting to be a writer. Because if you're talking to people who don't want to miss out on fulfilling their potential, sure, you're talking to writers, but you might be running into a lot of people who do a lot of things: filmmakers, artists, journalists, teachers, scientists. I mean, like, now we're getting even deeper into their psychographics, and you can speak to that directly, and people can self-select. So the why now question takes the customer and their problem and turns it up, like turns the volume up on it, and is a really handy trick to understand the underlying psychographics that maybe even your audience might not even know, but that if you can speak to them, they are going to hear the ring of truth in that and be like, oh, wait, let me pay attention. What are they making? I feel seen and I feel understood, and I want to know more about what they're making and what they're doing. Okay, I hope that made some sense. I feel like each thing that we talked about today, I could go on and on about for like 20 minutes each, and I don't want to do that. So this is just like a brief overview. There's so much more to say about all of this and how to do this, but hopefully this 5-person kind of audit and choosing one person and asking these 3 questions of that one person is at least a useful place to start. There's always more to do. Before I scoot out of here and end this episode, I did want to leave you with this last thought, which is you have to speak to one person for that one person to show up. It's not usually the other way around. So I don't want it to sound like if you build it, they will come, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you just like build a thing and then wait for people to flood in. It's more like if you talk to them, they'll respond. I try to think about that all the time, which is, what is the conversation that I want to have? And then I have to start it. I have to start that conversation. That is the way to grow an audience. You start the conversation and you speak as if people will respond, and eventually people start responding. It just happens. Whether it happens slowly or quickly, like, again, that's more information and more tactics to use and strategies and all of that. But the basis, the foundation of that is have a conversation, but you have to start it. If you speak, they will respond. And I think if indie artists knew that they just needed to start the conversation and act as if you're in the middle of the conversation, act as if everyone loves you and they're going to respond to you, and they will, I feel like we would have a much more defined audience for each of our artistic projects. And we would find it much easier to grow an audience because we are inviting people into a conversation with us. And that is a lot different than just speaking at people. And that, I think, is where you grow an audience, you grow a community, you start building a scene around your work, but you have to start talking. Okay, that's it for today. I would love to hear what you thought about this episode. Leave a comment on Substack and tell me if you try out any of these 5 questions to figure out who your audience is. Tell me if you have any questions about psychographics in general. And I do have one ask when it comes to sharing this episode. I would be so appreciative if you texted this episode to a friend. Someone you think who might like this, please send it their way. Growing by word of mouth and growing by friends sharing it to friends is literally my gold star. And if I do that, I feel like I'm, accomplishing what I want to accomplish here. And if you rate and review on Spotify and Apple, that is amazing. But truly, just sharing this episode with one person would be the best. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and doing all the things that you are doing in the independent world. We need your stuff, so keep making it. Until next week, good luck out there.